It's just after 5:30 p.m. on Monday the 5th of January 1976, and a red Ford Transit minibus is climbing a hill on the Kingsmill Road, the narrow country lane running between Whitecross and Bessbrook in South County Armagh. The coroner's reconstruction would later put 17 workers at the factory gate when the shift ended at 5:15. 4 Catholic workmates had already been dropped off at Whitecross. 12 men remain on board, 11 are Protestant. The 12th is Catholic. Winter darkness has settled over the fields. As the bus crests the rise, the driver picks out a figure standing in the road ahead. A man in combat uniform, flashing a torch. Another checkpoint, they assume. The kind everyone in this part of Armagh has been waved through 100 times. The driver slows. The bus pulls up. The men stepping out of the dark aren't checking papers. Gunmen in combat jackets, faces blackened, rise from the hedges on both sides of the road and surround the minibus. About a dozen by the count of the Belfast Telegraph the next day, at least 12 by the Inquest's eventual finding. A man with a pronounced English accent does the talking. He orders the 12 workers out of the vehicle and lines them up facing it, hands on the roof. Then he asks the question that decides what happens next. Which of you is Catholic? The only Catholic is Richard Hughes. His workmates, convinced the gunmen are loyalists who have stopped the bus to kill him, try to hold him back, try to stop him identifying himself. Hughes steps forward anyway. The gunman tells him to get down the road and not look back. He walks away into the dark. He does not look back. That leaves 11 Protestant men standing in a line against the side of their own minibus. The lead gunman says one word: right. The others open fire. The shooting takes less than a minute. The gunmen fire automatic and semi-automatic rifles at close range. Armallites, an M1 carbine, an M1 Garand, self-loading rifles, a 9mm weapon, a shotgun. The House of Commons record later puts the count at 136 rounds in under 60 seconds. The first burst catches the men at waist height. They collapse, some falling on top of each other, dead or wounded. The gunmen reload. An order comes: finish them off. A second burst pours into the heap of bodies on the road. Then one gunman walks among the fallen, shooting each man in the head with a pistol. 10 of the 11 die at the scene. The 11th is a 32-year-old named Alan Black. He has been hit 18 times. One bullet has grazed his skull. He fell forward onto his face, and another man collapsed across his legs. When the gunman working down the line reaches him and fires, the bullet passes across his head. Black does not move. He does not flinch. He said later, "I didn't even flinch, because I knew if I moved, there would be another one." The gunmen walk away, calmly, into the darkness. Shortly afterwards, a married couple driving past comes upon the scene and begins praying beside the bodies. They find Alan Black still alive, lying in a ditch. An ambulance takes him to hospital in Newry, where surgeons operate, and he survives. Richard Hughes, the man told to walk, stops a car and reaches Bessbrook RUC station, where he raises the alarm. One of the first RUC officers on the scene is a man named Billy McCaughey. He will describe what he found. When we arrived, it was utter carnage. Men were lying 2 or 3 together. Blood was flowing, mixed with water from the rain. McCaughey's presence on that road carries a weight nobody at the scene yet understands. He will later admit to taking part in the killings that happened the night before, 10 miles away. The dead are named in the coroner's record. John Bryans, 46. Robert Chambers, 19. Reginald Chapman, 25. Walter Chapman, 23. Robert Freeburn, 50. Joseph Lemon, 46, a former officer in the Ulster Special Constabulary. John McConville, 20. James McWhirter, 58. Robert Walker, 46, the driver, from Mount Norris. Kenneth Wharton, 24, a former UDR soldier. 9 of the 10 lived in Bessbrook. 4 were members of the Orange Order. The oldest was 58, the youngest 19. They were linen workers at the Glenanne Mill, men who rode the same bus home every working day. All 10 were killed for the single reason that they were Protestant. Some of the Reevy family drove past the scene that night on their way to the hospital to collect their own dead. Johnston Chapman, uncle of Reginald and Walter Chapman, said the workmen were just lying there like dogs, blood everywhere. At least 2 of the victims were so badly mutilated that their relatives were prevented from identifying them. One relative said the hospital mortuary was like a butcher's shop with bodies lying on the floor like slabs of meat. The response was immediate. The British government declared County Armagh a special emergency area and moved hundreds of extra troops and police into the region. A battalion of the UDR was called out. 2 days later, Prime Minister Harold Wilson announced that the Special Air Service was being sent into South Armagh, the first time the SAS's presence in Northern Ireland had ever been officially acknowledged. Secretary of State Merlin Rees warned of what was coming. This is the way it will go on unless someone in their right senses stops it. It will go on. Kingsmill didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the brutal endpoint of a single week of sectarian reprisal and counter-reprisal in one rural stretch of Armagh. And its precision, one man separated out by religion, the rest executed in under a minute, remains one of the starkest pieces of evidence for how fast that cycle could escalate. The ambush didn't begin on the Kingsmill Road. It began 24 hours earlier, in a sitting room near Whitecross. On the evening of Sunday the 4th of January 1976, at around 6:10 p.m, at least 3 masked gunmen entered a house called Grey Hillen near Whitecross and opened fire on 3 brothers watching television. John Martin Reevy, 24, Brian Reevy, 22, and Anthony Reevy, 17. A Northern Ireland Assembly debate would later describe the scene in plain words. Gunmen broke into the home and sprayed the living room with bullets, killing John Martin instantly. Brian tried to escape. He was shot dead. Anthony was hit multiple times, hid under a bed, then crawled to a neighbour's house, the parish priest's by one account, to raise the alarm. He died in hospital weeks later from a brain hemorrhage caused by his injuries. About 10 minutes later, at Ballydugan near Guildford, gunmen walked into the O'Dowd family home while a family gathering was underway and fired into the sitting room. 6 people were present. Around 30 shots were fired. Joseph O'Dowd, 61, was killed. His sons, Barry, 24, and Declan, 19, were killed. Barry and Declan's father, Barney O'Dowd, a sitting SDLP member, was seriously wounded and survived. 6 Catholics dead in less than 20 minutes in 2 coordinated attacks on family homes. The attacks were attributed to loyalist paramilitaries, specifically the Ulster Volunteer Force and the network that came to be known as the Glenanne Gang, a secret alliance of UVF militants, UDR soldiers and RUC officers. One former member said the aim was to provoke a civil war so that loyalists could crush the other side. The European Court of Human Rights later recorded that police believed the murders were carried out by the UVF. No one has ever been convicted for either attack. Billy McCaughey admitted taking part in the Reevey killings. His RUC colleague, John Weir, said 2 police officers and a British soldier were involved. The Historical Inquiries team later concluded the Reevey brothers were innocent civilians with no paramilitary links, and that no evidential opportunity ever existed to prosecute their killers. The Reevey and O'Dowd attacks weren't isolated either. They sat inside a longer spiral. The Provisional IRA and the British government had been observing a truce since February 1975, and loyalists had used the lull to murder 120 Catholics in that year. In County Armagh alone, from the start of the truce to the Kingsmill ambush, loyalists killed 35 Catholic civilians. Republicans killed 16 Protestant civilians and 17 members of the security forces in the same area. The Pat Finucane Centre counts 21 killings in a 16-day chain of attacks around South Armagh and the neighbouring counties. From a car bomb outside a pub in Dundalk on the 19th of December 1975, which killed 2 Catholics and injured 20, through a gun and bomb attack on a pub in Silverbridge hours later that killed 3 more, to a bomb in a pub in Guildford on New Year's Eve that killed 3 Protestants. That last attack was claimed under another cover name, the People's Republican Army, believed to be the INLA. The Irish News reported that the Reevey and O'Dowd killings were themselves revenge for the Guildford bombing. Locals began to describe the spiral in a bitter phrase: revenge for revenge. That night, Catholic families in the area braced for more. One local memoir records the author's family checking likely ambush points around their house and garden, and being at a family farm at King's Mills, the hamlet that would give the following evening's attack its name. Loyalists had used the fake checkpoint trick before. On the 31st July 1975, the Miami show band was stopped at a bogus military checkpoint by gunmen in army uniform. 3 band members were killed. The men who stopped the minibus on the Kingsmill Road were using a method loyalists had already turned into a signature. One more sign that, in this corner of Armagh, the tactics of one side were bleeding into the other. Into that atmosphere of revenge and counter-revenge, the red Ford Transit from the Glenann factory drove on the evening of the 5th of January. The men on board weren't soldiers, not politicians, not involved in any of it. They were workmates going home. The next morning, the revenge framing was made explicit by a voice on the telephone. At 10:49 a.m. on the 6th of January 1976, a man called the Belfast Newsletter. He said, "This is the South Armagh Republican Action Force. We wish to claim full responsibility for the shootings last night. It's in retaliation for the killings on Sunday night of the Reevey brothers at Whitecross and the O'Dowd family at Ballyduggan." The caller added that there would be no further action unless there was retaliation. He said his group was a completely separate organisation and have no connection with the Provos. No other individual or organisation has ever claimed responsibility for the attack. The name had appeared before. South Armagh Republican Action Force, sometimes rendered South Armagh Reaction Force, first surfaced in September 1975, claiming responsibility for a gun attack on Tullyvallen Orange Hall that killed 5 Protestant civilians. Across the Troubles, the name is credited in the Sutton database at Caen with 24 deaths, every one of them a civilian. Whether the name stood for a real independent organisation or a pure fiction is itself a matter of record. Caen treats it as an entity active from September 1975 to April 1977, while the HET and the Inquest concluded that for Kingsmill at least, it was a mask. Much as Loyalist killers used the name Protestant Action Force to hide the Glenanne gang, the Republican name gave cover to whoever actually planned and carried out the killings. The Provisional IRA was officially on ceasefire. It denied responsibility. On the 17th of January 1976, it issued a statement. The Irish Republican Army has never initiated sectarian killings, and sectarianism of any kind is abhorrent to the Republican movement. If the Loyalist elements responsible for over 300 sectarian assassinations in the past 4 years stop such killing now, then the question of retaliation from whatever source won't arise. The Historical Inquiries Team, the police unit set up to review unsolved Troubles killings, reached a different conclusion in 2011. Its report found that members of the Provisional IRA carried out the attack despite the ceasefire, that the South Armagh Republican Action Force was a cover name, and that the victims were targeted because they were Protestant. The report was blunt. These dreadful murders were carried out by the Provisional IRA and none other. The murders, it said, had been planned. The Reevy and O'Dowd killings were simply the catalyst for the premeditated and calculated slaughter of these innocent and defenceless men. Sinn Féin's Mitchell McLaughlin said he didn't dispute the sectarian nature of the killings, but continued to believe the IRA's denials. The SDLP's Dominic Bradley called on Sinn Féin to publicly accept that the HET's forensic evidence on the firearms used puts provisional responsibility beyond question. The forensic trail was extensive. 2 AR-18 rifles used in the shooting were recovered near Cullyhanna in 1990. Wider ballistic studies traced the guns used at Kingsmill to 37 murders, 22 attempted murders, and 19 non-fatal shootings between 1974 and 1989. One Kingsmill gun was used in the murders of senior RUC officers 13 years later. Toby Harnden's Bandit Country, the standard history of the South Armagh IRA, recorded the British military intelligence assessment that the attack was carried out by local IRA members acting outside the normal command structure, and that RUC files suggested 14 IRA members, including the future real IRA leader Michael McKevitt, had met on New Year's Eve to plan it. Sean O'Callaghan, an IRA man who worked for the security forces as a double agent, claimed the IRA Chief of Staff, Seamus Toomey, authorised the attack after Brian Keenan argued it was the only way to stop more Catholics being killed. Rory O'Brodig insisted that he and Toomey learned of it only after it happened. A police intelligence report recorded that the IRA Army Council had reprimanded its South Armagh Brigade for sectarian killings 6 weeks before Kingsmill. The 2024 inquest went further than the HET. The coroner found that the South Armagh Republican Action Force claim was a lie. The attack was carried out by the IRA, operating under the authority of the Army Council. But the IRA itself has never admitted it. No organisation has owned the Kingsmill killings in 50 years. No individual has ever been charged, tried, or convicted. Rumours of state involvement have circled the attack since the night it happened. The man who stopped the bus spoke with an English accent, which fed speculation that Captain Robert Nyrak, the British Army officer later kidnapped and killed by the IRA, was on the road that evening. Both the HET and the Inquest examined the claim and rejected it. The coroner was entirely satisfied that Captain Nyrak had no role whatsoever. His battalion was in England, relocating between London and Pirbright, and he left for Kenya on 13th of January 1976. The wider rumours he dismissed as unevidenced and unhelpful conspiracy theorising. In 2012, a Royal Military Police document shown to the Sunday World suggested a different kind of failure. It recorded that the gunman who finished off the dying men, referred to only as P, was wounded in a firefight with British soldiers near the Mountain House Inn in South Armagh on 25th of June 1976 and was treated at a hospital across the border. 2 of the guns captured in that firefight had been used at Kingsmill. The document said the security forces knew where P was and made no attempt to have him arrested and extradited. He has never been prosecuted, despite extensive paramilitary involvement, which, the newspaper suggested, pointed to a protected agent. The document has never been independently tested, but it fed the suspicion, carried by Alan Black for decades, that people in uniform knew more than they ever said. What the official record couldn't do was identify individual perpetrators. The coroner's own summary of the problem: repetition of intelligence, no matter how often, does not elevate it to evidence. That is where Alan Black's 50 years of testimony begins. He is the only man alive who saw the unit from the ground. Alan Black was shot in the first burst, which he later estimated lasted about 10 seconds. He fell forward onto his face. Another man collapsed across his legs. He could hear the groans of his colleagues. He heard the order to finish them off, and he heard the gunmen moving among the bodies. When one of them reached him and fired, the bullet grazed his head. He didn't move. He told the reopened inquest in May 2016, his statement read by a barrister, that the noise was deafening and that he lay still among the dead because he knew that if he moved, there would be another shot. He was taken to hospital in Newry with 18 gunshot wounds. That number has followed him through every account of the ambush, and he has always treated it with a precision the record often lacks. Asked how he survived 18 bullets, he corrects the question. 18 wounds is the medical tally, not 18 separate direct strikes. The distinction matters to him because it's the difference between what happened and what gets said about it. He spent months in hospital, recovering from injuries that marked his body for the rest of his life. Then he started talking, and he never stopped. He has given testimony to the inquest, to the BBC, to RTE, to print journalists. In 2018, he told the story on RTE's Sunday with Miriam and on the Pat Kenny programme, in the same flat, first-person register he has always used. In 2014, he argued, through his solicitor, that state informers may have been inside the unit that shot him, that the attack was known about in advance and allowed to happen. On the mantelpiece at home, he keeps a photograph of himself at the scene of the killings. He has said it's the first thing he sees every morning. "I'm the only one who can tell it, and I have to tell it," he said in 2024, describing a duty to 10 workmates who didn't get up off that road. Karen Armstrong, sister of the youngest victim, John McConville, put the family view more darkly. A lot of people were being protected back then, and they still are. In the 2021 New Year Honours, Alan Black was appointed MBE, not for surviving, but for the cross-community work he has done in the decades since. After the inquest delivered its findings in 2024, he called the outcome disappointing and renewed his demand for a public inquiry, because the inquest answered who was responsible in general terms, but didn't answer why nobody was ever held to account. The original investigation ran for decades and produced nothing. No arrests, no charges, no convictions. The reopened inquest documented the failures in granular detail. During the inquest, the court heard that one key suspect had been linked by a PSNI review to 46 murders between 1974 and 1976. The investigation's defenders point out that the police were drowning. The coroner himself noted that the RUC faced an overwhelming workload due to terrorist crime in South Armagh, and that the investigative resources available were entirely inadequate. His conclusion on the original investigation: it was not perfect, but its deficits can be put down to the abnormal security environment of South Armagh in 1976, the extraordinary demands on the police, and the murderous competence of those who executed the atrocity and left without trace. And then the key limitation: common knowledge as to those with the means and motive to carry out this heinous act does not amount to evidence. The inquest was ordered in August 2013 by the Attorney General for Northern Ireland, John Larkin QC, following the HET's findings. It opened in 2016. It was adjourned for a year when a 59-year-old man was arrested on new evidence. In February 2018, the Public Prosecution Service said there was no reasonable prospect of a conviction. On 12th of April 2024, the coroner, His Honour Judge Brian Sherrard, delivered his findings. The verdict was stark. Kingsmill was an overtly sectarian attack by the IRA, he concluded. It was mounted because the deceased men were Protestants and for no other reason. The unit, he found, consisted of at least 12 IRA members drawn from South Armagh and North Louth, masquerading as an army patrol. 10 of them discharged weapons at the scene. At least 2 others were tasked with keeping Richard Hughes some considerable distance from the shooting site, so he couldn't see what happened. The attack was planned well in advance, organised in part from the Republic of Ireland, and couldn't possibly have been put together in the 24 hours after the Reevy and O'Dowd killings. The revenge claim, the coroner found, was ostensible. On the question of the state, the inquest found no evidence of collusion and no proof that the security forces knew the attack was coming. There had been an army patrol within 1.5 miles of the ambush site as it happened. The commanding officer described claims that the area was out of bounds as nonsense. What the inquest couldn't do was name a single perpetrator for prosecution. The coroner told the families that neither the organisation nor the individuals responsible had any intention of explaining the atrocity, much less being held to account. They are uninterested in transparency concerning their actions. The House of Commons debated the findings on 2nd of May 2024. 50 years after the shootings, the official record now establishes 3 things. The attack was sectarian. It was carried out by the IRA under a cover name, and the state's investigation of it was demonstrably inadequate. It does not establish who pulled the triggers, why no one was prosecuted, or whether anyone in uniform knew what was coming down that road. Those questions remain open. In the village of Bessbrook, the names are cut into stone. The memorial at College Square East is inscribed, "The innocent victims murdered at King's Mills." At the roadside site itself, a larger memorial was built in 2012. During construction, it was vandalised with sectarian graffiti in an attempt to intimidate the families and the builders. The King's Mills Memorial Committee keeps the anniversaries, with services at Bessbrook Town Hall and at the attack site. A local memoirist remembered walking up the street in Bessbrook alone to attend the funerals, one after another, for men he had known. Memory of the attack has never been neutral. In the immediate aftermath, elements of the security forces harassed the Reevy family and accused Eugene Reevy of organising the attack. In 1999, Ian Paisley repeated that allegation in the House of Commons under parliamentary privilege, claiming to quote a police dossier. The RUC Chief Constable, Ronnie Flanagan, denied that any such dossier existed. Alan Black went to the Reevy house to say he knew Eugene was innocent. The Historical Inquiries team apologised to the Reevy family in 2007 and formally exonerated the brothers in a May 2010 report. Paisley never withdrew the allegation before his death in 2014. The memory stays live in ugly ways. In 2018, a Sinn Féin MP filmed himself balancing a loaf of bread on his head, a gesture widely read as mocking Kingsmill, and later resigned the party whip. Historians have folded Kingsmill into the wider debate about the Troubles. It's the case study that any account of Republican violence has to answer. The scholarship that defends the IRA's targeting record treats the ambush as the exception that must be explained away, while standard histories place it at the climax of the tit-for-tat spiral of the mid-1970s. A study of border Protestants notes the 10 victims remain tethered to ongoing community memory, and that where there has been no conviction, collusion is widely suspected. Toby Harnden's Bandit Country devotes serious coverage to it. The weapons linked to the attack were used in scores of other killings across the same stretch of border country. Kingsmill wasn't the last time Protestant workmen would be singled out on a rural road either. In 1992, 8 were killed when a minibus was bombed at T-Bane Cross in County Tyrone. It wasn't an isolated atrocity. It was the sharpest end of a pattern. One man was told to walk away, and he walked. Richard Hughes lived for many years after that night, the one man on the bus whose religion saved him. He never saw the shooting. The gunmen made sure of that. 10 others were told to stand in a line. They were shot because they were Protestant. Alan Black has spent nearly 50 years being the answer to a question nobody should have had to survive to answer. What it feels like to be shot 18 times, to lie still among your dead workmates, to hear the order to finish them off and not move, not flinch, not breathe, until the last gunman walks away. The road outside Bessbrook still exists. The hedges have grown over. The minibus is long gone. A memorial stands at the side of the tarmac where a married couple once stopped to pray over bodies in the rain. Alan Black is still here too, in his 80s, still telling the story, still keeping the photograph where he can see it every morning. The 10 men he rode home with are remembered because he refused to stop talking about them. The road remains, so does he. If you want more stories like this, the overlooked corners of the Troubles, told with the precision they deserve, subscribe and turn on notifications.